So we will switch from geochemistry to geomagnetism. Um, so, as I said, this lecture should have been done by Céline Gervili. She sent me as a PDF. I couldn't modify, so but that's okay. I will try to follow her ideas, um, and it's better for me. Like this, if there is something you don't understand, I'm not guilty. Um, so the lectures, there is four lectures. Okay. The first one is kind of easy. Uh, is a kind of thing. If you studied earth science in uh, in masters, you should know about this. It's just about to remember. So it's a description of the geomagnetic field, what we know, and what we know today, and what we know from the past. And then tomorrow, then be ready for tomorrow. We will do some dynamo theory. That's kind of more complicated, but this is so. And we will look at experimental dynamos and numerical simulations. So a lot of movies. So it's entertainment. Okay, and then uh, we will go to my favorite subject, dynamics of the Earth core, and we will see how rotating fluids, what is convection and rotating fluids, and then the same lecture will be continued by David Sebron, speaking about instead of convection, speaking of precession and other forcing on cores. So this will end 5 and 6, 2 lectures. So today, four four parts: source of the near Earth magnetic field, and then we will look at the magnetic data, and then we will look at how this magnetic data vary in space, and then we will look at how this magnetic data vary in time. Okay, so there is magnetic field everywhere, and it's not easy to 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 feel it. Probably some animals feel it, like pigeons and others. Probably some of you feel it. So it's not clear, even for biologists, the way you feel magnetic field. And it is funny that this has been described, scientific description of the effect of magnetic field has been described very early, and probably this is because there is no intuitions, no physical intuitions, so it's kind of magic. uh, and this is true that even you, probably when you were young, you play with magnets. If you didn't, do it, because this is missing to your education. If you didn't play with magnets, it's not too late. It's not too late. It's better to do it right now. It's like a psychology. There is steps in your life, and if you didn't play with magnets, then you have to do it. Why do I say that? Ah, yes. I'm almost as messy as Mathieu was, so I will be lost many times. Um, yeah, the funny thing is that uh, evidence of magnetism and magnetic Earth field uh, was described a long time ago, and probably the first scientific description ever in the Western civilization has been done at the 12th century, where and is it interesting to notice that the scientists really began to write and do logics to explain North Pole, South Pole, and the connection. And we have written papers uh, like 5 years after the creation of the University of Paris, La Sorbonne. Uh, there is letters already of students. Pierre de Maricourt, which was a French knight who went to fight in South Italy in and make when you encircle a town and wait forever. I don't know, the siege, a siege, and he spent months doing nothing. So he just studied magnetic interaction of magnets and wrote Epistele de Magnete, which is a letter, and he wrote it to his professor in La Sorbonne. And we have this text in Latin, uh, 1269, if I remember well. But this is not okay. Uh, and this is when we define North Pole, South Pole, and things like that. And he cut magnets in two and found that this is two magnets could not separate the poles. Very interesting. So we can do measure magnetic field in this room. I didn't bring my little magnet, but I can play with it. And the problem is that the magnetic field is due to many sources. Uh, and this is the result of a superposition of many things. And that's why we took a long time to understand and to separate the sources. Uh, because there is, at the end of the 19th century, physicists have shown that the magnetic field is a result of two different things, which have the same physical behavior: magnetized media and electrical currents. So, if you measure a magnetic field, you cannot separate a magnetic field coming from magnetized media, magnets, and electrical currents. So we have magnetized materials. Actually, any material is magnetized. It could be diamagnetic, paramagnetic, or ferromagnetic. So the ferromagnetic materials are the one we are interested in because they have a remanent magnetic field, but the other ones also are magnetized and produce magnetic fields. But they will produce a magnetic field if they are inside a magnetic field. So we call it induced magnetic field. And that's all makes the thing also difficult. For example, the oceans, the water is salted, is conductive of electricity, it's an electrical conductor, and when the magnetic field of the Earth is changing, the current inside the ocean are changing, and we have an induced response of the magnetic field. So when you measure the source, and you measure the effect of the oceans. And then you have one measurement. So it's difficult to separate, for example, induced field. So these are the oceans. And you have effect of the magnets in the crust. And interesting discovery at the beginning of the 20th century was the Curie temperature. It is called Curie temperature in France and probably has a name elsewhere. I don't know the English version of the Curie temperature, so you have to the same? Really? Ah. It's not so common, you know. We have French name for all these kind of things. And generally others have other names, like Descartes' law, Snell's law. Okay, so Curie temperature. But in Grenoble, we used to use to modify the Curie temperature in Néel temperature. So even in France, you have localism. You see, Louis Néel was a Nobel Prize in 1970 and worked on this subject. It is clear. It is concerning ferromagnets. At a given temperature, any magnet is losing its ferromagnetic properties and becomes paramagnetic. And so there is a temperature which is 1043 K for iron, and probably magnetite is 580 C, so lower. Uh, and at this temperature, you lose the magnetic properties, the permanent magnetic properties. So it's like you start a clock, and the clock is put to zero when you cross this temperature. And in the opposite way, and there is posters on that. Who has a poster on that? Yes, you do. So you will come here to explain the way it works. But if you go the other way around, you take a rock, and at higher temperature is paramagnetic, but when you go below this temperature, it becomes ferromagnetic. And then when it's become ferromagnetic, it behaves like a magnet, and the magnetization of the rock will be aligned with the axis, with the magnetic field which is around the rock when it becomes below this Curie temperature. So this is what happened in the crust. But the main contribution of the magnetic field is due to the core, to the fluid core. This red part. And probably not from the solid core. Still people believe, still not very serious, but scientists believe that we don't know about the materials, all the materials and all properties, but at high pressure, there is people who believe that with high pressure, the Curie temperature is going up. So still, but you will see that because of temporal variation of the magnetic field, it's you cannot believe that the magnetic field coming from the core is ferromagnetic. It has to be something else. But not a long time ago, perhaps less than 5 years ago, I reviewed papers claiming that there is a permanent magnetic field in the core. So because with pressure, for example, some materials like cobalt, or probably cobalt, yeah, cobalt, the Curie temperature increase with pressure. So if you extrapolate that to the core, but this is not what we. So crystal field, this is 30 times lower in terms of intensity of magnetic field, and a good way to separate lithospheric magnetic field to core magnetic field is also lateral variation in space, because you have oceanic crust and continental crust. They will have a different magnetization. So like this, when you see variation in space, you can I'll come back to that later. You can separate the crystal field from other field, and you have field coming from outside. First, you have the magnetic field coming from the sun itself, and there is a magnetic field even coming from the galaxy itself. And for example, during the accretion processes that Marc Chaussidon described Saturday morning, magnetic field is important in that processes. Probably. So you cannot escape magnetic fields. They are everywhere. And you have also a magnetic field coming from what we call the magnetosphere, and also from the ionosphere. And for for sake of simplicity, we generally describe them, but they are connected, so it's even not easy. But one clear evidence of these external magnetic fields are linked to what we call magnetic storms. And during some days, if you look at your magnet, you will see that there is strange um, temporal variation in terms of with frequencies with period of 1 second to 24 hours, and these variations, temporal variations, are really due to the external fields and to magnetic storms. These magnetic storms are really connected to the sun activity. The sun is the strong magnetic field, and at the surface there is storms, magnetic storms, which produce uh, eruption of materials which are thrown to the earth, and we can look at the surface, sun surface. We can do what we call the space weathercast, and 2 days after seeing these eruptions, 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days after seeing this eruption at the surface of the sun, we have the magnetic storm coming into the earth, disturbing the magnetosphere and producing a strong variation of magnetic field at the surface of the earth. This happens, and this make boreal aurora. So beautiful, but dangerous. Okay. So I already say all of that. Yeah, that's interesting. We can see the last statement. We can see tides. As I said, the oceans. Uh, the tides move the oceans. It's an electrical fluid, so when they move, they change the magnetic field. So it changed the magnetic field of a few nanotesla, which is 30,000 times lower than the main component, but we do see it. So to build a magnetic field model, we have to separate all these sources, and that's not easy, and that's not very clear the way they do it. I'm not doing it myself, but you take a space and temporal variation and you analyze them, and from this analysis you attribute contributions to different parts. But sometimes it's not very clear if you should attribute this, for example, day variation or month variation, if it's due to the magnetosphere or due to the core. So from a long time, so the magnetic field from the mathematical point of view is a vector. So a vector is three components. Uh, if you use Descartes or Cartesian coordinates, its three components is x, y, z. Descartes is also okay. It's Cartesian in every language probably. But as I said, we do measure the magnetic field from a very long time, before Descartes actually. So people use old-fashioned way of describing a vector because they even didn't know it was a vector. When you here is a magnetic field, okay. So here is the vertical axis z, and this is the horizontal axis with the north here, the east here. So we describe the magnetic field with three components. The inclination, which is the angle between the horizontal plane and the magnet, which is aligned with the axis with the magnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field, and then the declination, which is the angle between the geographic north and the magnetic north, and we count it positively at the east, because when we introduced declination at the 16th century, the declination was east in Paris or in London. So that we can do right now. Even here, we could try to determine the declination. And the third component because for a vector you need three things. So declination, inclinations, and the third will be the intensity. And the first one to determine the intensity was Gauss in 1836. And it's a tricky experiment to determine the intensity of the magnetic field. Okay, we do that in many observatories. Each red dot in this map is a magnetic observatory. He has Gauss defined in 1840 what you have to measure to make a magnetic observatory. So we develop magnetic observatories everywhere, trying to map the whole world, but it's difficult to do it in oceans. First of all, because there is water and it's not easy to. And so we have to rely on islands, and as you know, islands in oceans, they are volcanic islands, and volcanic islands, they are made of basalt, and basalt are very magnetized materials. So it's not so easy to measure variation of a magnetic field on a magnet itself. It's better to be somewhere else. But so many places interesting. So this is Chambon-la-Forêt. This is in Forêt d'Orléans, central part of France. First, we do measure. The first magnetic observatory in France was at the Observatoire de Paris, where we define the longitude 0. In 1680, with the creation during Louis XIV, he created to make war to the British. He decided because the French admirals they always lost any battles against the English. You know that. No, should off the record. But then the king asked, "Why do we always lose?" He says, "Because of a magnetic field." So with the war effort of Louis XIV, the King of France, he created the Observatoire de Paris with two missions because the French Navy say that we never know where we are. So we cannot attack the other ones. We even don't know where we are. So they didn't know their latitude and longitude. Okay. So the Observatoire de Paris has to determine longitude and latitude. And we can use compass to do that. And we can also use observations of, in particular, observation of moons of Jupiter. So the Observatoire de Paris has this mission. And 2 years later, the British opened the Observatoire de Londres, which is not in London, but in Greenwich. So 2 years later, remember that. Huh? And they define their own longitude 0, the Greenwich meridian. And once again, they won. Who remember the Paris meridian 0 longitude? Who? Except myself, probably. It's so easy because it. Yes, we have 1 minute. It's very easy because we had to define a longitude 0. So they decided that the longitude 0 will be in the queen room, where she sleeps, at the middle of the bed. And if you go to the Luxembourg garden, park in Paris, you will see this is at the middle. There is a kind of everything is aligned at the middle, and it's symmetric, the Luxembourg Park. And the middle is exactly the longitude 0, the meridian Paris. And the room at the top of this of the Palais du Luxembourg, this is where the queen was, because that was the queen palace at that time. And Observatoire de Paris is aligned with this line. If you go turn around and you don't look at the queen, you go the other direction, south, you will see that the Observatoire de Paris is exactly. But now these crazy people at the 18th century, they built the Boulevard Saint-Michel, which is not north-south. It's just so you lose completely. That was the end of everything. That's typically French. We fight. We fight for 2 centuries to impose the meridian in Paris, and then we say, "Oh, we lose. We take another direction." Okay. Okay. And then, so from 1678 in France and from 1680 in Greenwich, there is somebody paid to measure the magnetic field, to produce maps, magnetic maps for Navy mainly. Because we discovered at that time that the magnetic field was varying in time, so we needed to produce maps, and I'll come back to that later. And each time we had revolution in Paris, we had many, huh? They tried to kill anybody which represent the other, and so it was dangerous place to be. Uh, so we lose many times the data, but we have plenty of them. We will see, you will see that. So now and it's not anymore in Paris. You do measure the magnetic field. It's in Chambon-la-Forêt because in 18, yeah, because we are a centralized country, much more than England was. Uh, so we decided that the magnetic observatory should be in Paris, center of the world. But in 1860, when the train come into Paris, then they perturb the measure of the magnetic field, and we could see train going and coming and going. So we were not really interested in measuring timetable of trains using magnetic data. So we moved this observatory to Saint-Maur-les-Fossés, outside Paris, and then in 1930, the train were also there. So we move it to Chambon-la-Forêt, like something like 50 kilometers to any place, living people, forest, with what's the name of this salvage pork? I don't know the name in English. Sanglier. There's only this kind of things around, not magnetized, so it was okay. But in 1983, when the TGV go from Paris to Lyon, that was the first TGV in France, it perturbed the measurements. So, and no way to go further. So now magnetic data anywhere in the world are really changed by a presence of human activities, and we have to deal with that. And at the magnetic observatory, you see this very nice grass. So you have to cut it once a while. When you cut it, the magnetic data you just follow the guy cutting the grass. So the observer should put a note saying, from this day from 5 to 6, we cut the grass. Don't take the data. Yes. 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 Yes, that's true. So we we can do something, but it's not very good. I cannot explain why. You have induced parts, and as I said, the oceanic currents move, so you have plenty of the signal is not very good. It's not very good to be very precise. So we rely on other signals. The accuracy is 1 nanotesla. I said that the tides a few nanotesla. So and there is a nice place, Antarctica, for example. This is Dumont d'Urville, a nice place to be a magneto people. So that's the data, the ground data. So you see a few data. This is the influence of Gauss, which really define what is a magnetic observatory. The first one in Göttingen, in Germany, is still in place. I visited it years ago, and still the cabin, everything in wood to have no magnets. Uh, Everything is like this. There is pen on the table. You suppose that Gauss put that pen. Nobody touch it. Uh, he's like a god, you know, in Germany. And then there is an effort, international effort, mainly due to colonization of England and France. Uh, okay, not only bad things with colonization. And then in 1958, this is the international year, international geophysics year, probably something like this. So then is developing, and the colors correspond to what we can do. And now we have 1 minute values of a magnetic field. This is mainly to study magnetospheric and ionospheric effects. For geophysics, we, we annual means or monthly means are enough. So you can find all this data to that address. The American collect all of this. It is called Intermagnet network. So all these data are present. You can download them. It's very easy. And if you don't have them, you cannot use the compass. And from the year first, yes, yeah. These maps are a kind of very important magnetic maps, especially during the Cold War. Magnetic field was used to make positioning in a way before GPS time. Uh, but for civil use and geophysical use, we have this this I don't know actually. Probably they are military satellites, magnetic satellites. And the first one I know of is MagSat, but even MagSat was partly military purpose. And then this Ørsted was really the first satellite launched by the Geophysical Society, Geophysical Community. It's a Danish satellite in Copenhagen. And then CHAMP, which is a German satellite. SAXI, from Argentina or Brazil, I forgot. And SWARM. SWARM is a constellation of satellites, of 3 satellites. This is a SWARM satellite. It copies the CHAMP satellite with ameliorations, updates. And there is 3 satellites, as you can see here, 2 side by side and 1 up. And this has been launched in 2013 and will go until 2023 at least. And these 3 satellites really measure the magnetic field, and the data I will show you. And this explains why we have a kind of less magnetic observatories. Even if now we stop to erode this because there is plenty of things and satellites which are like 400 kilometers above our heads don't see. Okay, so we are ready to go a spatial variation of the core field at the Earth's surface. So I'm a magician. I take the magnetic data in the observatories and satellites, and I suppose that I can extract all the other sources and keep only the core magnetic field coming from the core. So this is the magnetic field at the surface of the Earth. Red means positive. This is the radial component. It is written here. So meaning the vertical component if you are the surface of the Earth. And when it's blue, meaning it's negative. So it is negative. The magnetic field is negative. The radial component of the magnetic field is negative in the northern hemisphere and positive in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so that's the first difficulty, is that at the North Pole we have a south magnetic pole. Because we get confused, because when Pierre de Maricourt and then follower scientists studying the magnetic field, they colored in red the north pole of a magnet. It's still active today, if you look at the compass, because there is no way to separate North Pole of South Pole. And the North Pole of your magnet is facing a South Pole. So the Earth magnet has this South Pole at the North Pole. Is that clear? So that makes some confusion, meaning that the Earth magnet is like this, with the North Pole at the South Pole. Okay. It's strange because these are a view, so you have strange things like this curve or this here. We call that an anomaly. This is old terms. I mean, old 19th century things. They are anomalies. Anomalies to what we don't know because we anomaly to what we expect. That I don't know what we expect. So and here too. I mean, in the South Pole and North Pole, we have anomaly. First, you see that the pole, the North magnetic pole, is not at the South Pole. The South Pole is here at the center. So there is a kind of a 10 degrees off an angle. That's interesting because now it's in C, so we can measure it very easily. But at the North Pole, I like it. You know, it's like this, easy to remember. You see it? And you can even do that. So the North Pole was here for a very long time. I'll come back to that later. But it's still here, around here. Okay? That's the measurements of the magnetic field. And there was expedition at the beginning of the 20th century to measure that. Actually, there was expedition all over the times. And one is very well known in 1786, French expedition, La Pérouse expedition. And one of their goal was also to measure the magnetic field. And actually, they all die in New Caledonia, but not the data. Because, that's a funny part, because they have done they went to the expedition went to the Atlantic and then the Pacific, and they stop in Japan, or no, not in Japan, in Vladivostok. And then one scientist of this expedition was Condorcet. For the French people, there is a Condorcet high school in many towns, and Condorcet Place in many towns. So Condorcet was a politician at the French Revolution, but before to be a politician, he was a scientist. He was part of La Pérouse. So the people of La Pérouse expedition give all the results, the copy of the results of their expedition to Condorcet in Vladivostok, and tell him, go to Paris by foot. And everybody was laughing, saying he will never appear in Paris. He will be killed before. There is no way to to go from here to Paris without at 1788. And then Condorcet made it. Nobody know how he made it, but he made it. Okay, but all the other ones were killed in New Caledonia. So, and we have the data because Condorcet brought the data of the expedition, and especially the magnetic data. But the difficult part was to get the data, but the French didn't use the data. It was a German, von Humboldt, which is very well known too, in 1808. Yeah, we had many other things to do from 1789 to 1808, but von Humboldt took the data and proved for the first time. So he was a great scientist, but he studied also the magnetic field, and he proved that the magnetic field is dipolar, because it was the first time that we could measure a magnetic field all over the world. No, von Humboldt, 1808. And yeah, that's the funny part of La Pérouse expedition is that in 1794, so 8 years after the disparition of the French expedition, the French Revolution vote at the Chamber of Deputy. Another expedition tried to find the other one. They call the d'Entrecasteaux expedition, and they tried to follow the routes as the other one thought, and they went to New Caledonia, and they come back. They lose one boat, but they come back, and presumably in New Caledonia you have blonde hair people. So presumably, before killing all the French people of the La Pérouse expedition, they had good connection with local peoples. Okay. So, as von Humboldt showed it in 1808, the magnetic field is a dipole. Is a magnet, mainly a magnet. So that's the formula of a dipole, where M is a dipole moment. So B resulting from a magnet, M, dipolar magnet, M, is given by this formula. It's easy formula. It's not so easy to demonstrate it, but you can. So M, you can have M in different. That's AC units. Mu zero is what we call the vacuum magnetic permeability. It's a physics. It's one of the constants of the physics. And everything is AC, saying that B is in Tesla. But because of Gauss, we use a CGS unit, which is 1 Gauss, 10 to minus 4 Tesla. Still in use, but not. I'm not. I prefer to use Tesla. So, but this is very common because 1 Gauss is a typical magnetic field you observe at the surface of the Earth, 10 to minus 4 Tesla. So you can have this. So you take Z as a vertical axis, X, for example, toward north, Y toward east, and you have your local Cartesian coordinates. And you can suppose that M is facing Z. No, I forget that. Z is the axis of rotation of the Earth. X and Y, two axes in the plane perpendicular to the axis of rotation of the Earth. And this is at the surface of the Earth. E sub r is the vertical axis, local vertical axis. E sub theta, which is the latitudinal component in the spherical coordinates, is the north-south component of the magnetic field. And E sub phi is the east-west component of the magnetic field. So you play with this, and you suppose that M is aligned with the axis of rotation of the Earth, located at the center of the Earth, and you can compute what would make the magnet centered at the surface of the Earth and aligned with the axis of rotation. As I already said, this is the magnet is the other direction, but that's another question. And you can compute M and in spherical coordinates. And what you see is that if you have a magnet like this, you have no component, east-west component. Because if you have a magnet aligned with the axis of rotation, it's making a magnetic field which is comme ça, which is like this, and uh, uh, then it is axis symmetric, and you have no component along the east-west component, right? Okay, and that's mainly the work of von Humboldt actually. Uh, So this is a view you can have. So you have a magnet and the magnetic field lines. That's a concept which is not so easy, but which is very intuitive. So people are using it, but even if it's awkward from a mathematical point of view, it's so it is kind of lines where if you put a small magnet, it will align with this line. So a good way to put small magnets is to put iron powder, and it will align in lines. We call them magnetic field lines. So it gives you an idea of it makes magnetic field more intuitive. So the Earth's magnetic field, as I already show on the map, is not a pure dipolar magnetic field aligned with its axis of rotation. A good way to see it is the declination. Declination is the angle between the north geographic and north magnetic north. And if you have an east-west component of the magnetic field, then you will have a declination. So that's a declination. From a paper of Gauthier Hulot, I should have cited a reference to his work much before. He's one of the PI of the Swarm. He's working in Paris in IPGP, and he's a PI of the Swarm mission. So that's a paper to 2015. I think it's a Nature paper showing the modern data, magnetic modern data. So here you have a declination map. We call it isogone in French, probably the same in English, isogonic map. So this green line, which is called 0, where you are in this green line, your magnetic compass will give you the north truly. So if you want to go north and you are here, you have no correction to do. So if you are inside the Sahara desert and you get lost, you take your magnet and you want to go north, you have to follow. But you see, as soon as you leave this line, you have to correct. Oh. Okay. And there is places like in the South Atlantic where you have a correction of minus 20 degrees. So if you are, you have to be careful if you use a compass. And if you don't have a map, magnetic map, you get loose. So the French admirals of the Royal Navy, this is their excuse. We were at a place where the declination was totally wrong. we shot the French port. Okay. So it's complicated. And it's even more complicated at the poles, because at the poles, the magnetic poles are not at the geographical poles. So if you want to use your magnetic compass in this area, you have to have a good map. But, so, it is not a dipole, and it is not aligned with the axis of rotation, for sure. This is inclination, the angle with the horizontal. So you still see the magnetic anomaly in the South Atlantic. It's less funny, right? I prefer this. Huh? Okay. And the intensity. So blue is something like 20,000 nanotesla, and red is something like 70,000 nanotesla. So the anomaly you could see in declination and inclination in the South Atlantic in terms of intensity, is a very serious anomaly. You see? It's something like 3 times lower than maximum magnetic field. Has many consequences, and I'll come to these consequences later, but the strongest magnetic field is at the poles. So the magnetic equator should be lower, factor almost a factor 2, but at some places, especially here, is even lower. Oh, potential field. Thanks, Céline. At the end of the stories, we go into math. That's another story. So, this is Ampere's law. At least that's the way the French call it, because Ampere was French. So I don't know about others, but you have to live with it. So what Ampere discovers is that any current, electrical current, is producing a magnetic field such a way that the curl of the B of the magnetic field is equal to the currents. So it's easy. If you have a current, a wire, for example, which is an electrical current, you produce a magnetic field around the wire, which is making a loop. So that's a magnetic field lines. So B will be like this, and J will be like this. Easy. The problem is that you see already the difficulty is you making curves with straight lines. So okay. And this is a balance. So you can produce current. Current will produce magnetic field with such a geometry. But if by chance you produce a magnetic field which is not straight, it will produce a current itself. So it goes in the two ways, right? It's a balance. It's a physical balance. So if you know a tool to deform the magnetic field, you give me a magnetic field like this, magnetic field lines of the Earth, like this. You don't see it? I see it. Okay? And if you give me a tool to deform this magnetic field lines, I take this like this, but now they are doing that. You see it? This will produce a current this direction right away. You don't believe me? And you're right, because in this room, I cannot produce currents. Because in this room, there is no things to produce current. You need to move electrons. You need to be a conductive material, electrically conductive materials. So if you have no currents, J equals 0, then you have this equation, which is curl of B. B cannot be curl. Wow. Do we learn something from that? Yes, we do. Because there is a theorem saying that if curl of B is 0, then curl B could be written a gradient of V, where V is a scalar. Wow. That's a lot of information. Instead of having a magnetic vector, a vector with 3 components, we go by this mathematical equations to a scalar. So instead of 3 scalars, which is a vector, we have only 1. That's the problem is 3 times easier. Makes a big difference. So this probably has been derived by Gauss. Okay. And we have something else. So we have that what discovered by Pierre de Maricourt I referred to in 1269. He cut magnets. And when you cut a magnet, you have 2 magnets. So you cut magnets. From 1269 until now, we cut magnets. Physicists are cutting magnets. And they are looking for the monopole. Could you extract, like, could you extract a north magnetic pole without any south magnetic pole? Each time we cut a magnet, we have a dipolar magnet. You take a dipolar magnet, you cut it, you would have like two monopolar magnet. We didn't see any. So even physicists today, they are cutting protons, they are cutting they try to cut everything in smaller pieces and smaller pieces, but we never found any monopoles. So that's something which has to be mathematically speaking, it tells you that divergence of B equals 0. You cannot have a magnetic field which is divergent, because you can refer to what you know to electrical charge. If you have an electron somewhere, the electrical field will be like this, and its divergence is exactly equal to the charge. But for magnetic field, it doesn't exist. The magnetic field lines, they cannot diverge from one place or converge to one place. There is no magnetic poles. And the easiest, the simplest geometry for magnetic field is to have a north, south. So it diverges from south to go to north. So this is exactly the way we do it mathematically. We suppose that's a north magnetic monopoles, a south magnetic monopoles. We draw lines like this toward south pole, mathematically speaking. And for north pole, we draw line that's in your mind. And then we add these two field. Magnetic field due to the red one, magnetic field due to the north pole. The white one, we add the magnetic field is a vector, and then you find a dipole. So that's why we'd like to, because mathematically speaking, this is the way we build the magnetic field of a dipole. So we would like to find the kind of magnetic charge. We do not. So this is mathematically speaking, this is this. So if you have this and this, you put B here, you put it here, then you have Laplacian. She didn't write Laplacian. This is why now she's working in Newcastle, Céline. She forgot about the French way of saying things. Laplacian V equals 0. So V is a magnetic potential. So now, this is what we do. We assume that the conductivity of the mantle and the crust is negligible. And, yes, we find a solution to the Laplace equation, which is this one, to determine the value of V, which is a magnetic potential. So here is the Laplace equation in spherical coordinates. So it's a double, it's a second degree order operator playing on V, on radius. Theta is the colatitude and phi the longitude. So our friend Carl Friedrich Gauss found the solution of this. He was a very good mathematician. He was a very good geophysicist. He was a very good mathematician. He was a very good physicist. And to study the Earth's magnetic field, he introduced spherical harmonics. He introduced the Gauss theorem about one I've just shown, and he discovers that the magnetic field is a dipole and vary in time. The one study, three main results. So V, he showed that there is a solution that is made of spherical harmonics, which we call them from him YLM, where L is the degree and M is the order, and it's defined this way, where PLM are the associated Legendre polynomials, we were discovered before, and C is a coefficient, and exponential EM phi like it's like a Fourier transform in the longitude. Any L, for any L, any M, you take a form like this, you plot it here, and you found 0. So that's good because what did he prove also? He proved that the spherical harmonics constitute a basis. So you can describe any scalar field at the surface of the sphere with using this. So we are using it not only for magnetic purposes, but for example, seismologists have stolen this idea and they describe normal modes with that, but also quantum mechanics to describe the density probability distribution of electrons along an atom, around an atom, a core, the core. Is it the core? Yeah, the nucleus, around the nucleus. They use this. It is widely used, introduced for geomagnetic purposes, but widely used because, and it is used also to describe, if you want to describe at the surface of the Earth the rate of reproduction of human beings, you can use spherical harmonics. It will give you a very good. You can use it for anything, even for things which are not solving Laplace equation, because it's a basis of any function defined on a sphere, which is continuous with no discontinuities, and probably you need a function which is you can derive only once. It's all these functions. They form a basis and they are orthogonal, meaning that if you have coordinates on one of these functions and coordinates on the other one, they are orthogonal. You do dot product of these two functions makes 0. And you can normalize them. That's the normalization of Schmidt. I don't know who was Schmidt, but in geomagnetism you use this. A different community, you use different normalization. Our normalization says that the spherical harmonics, when you integrate it in a sphere, the integration equals 4 pi, which is the surface of the sphere. Okay. So some views of the spherical harmonics. So L is given you the number of 0 on the sphere, and M tells you how many lines of 0 on the sphere cut the equator. So it's easy. So M, no line cuts the equator, and there is 6 0 line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there is 1, 6 we don't see on the other pole. So you give me any L and M spherical harmonics, and in my mind I can imagine exactly how it is. So you see that the number L gives you a kind of a wavelength on the sphere. And if L is very large, then the wavelength is very small. Okay? So, for example, for L equal 10, the circumference of the Earth is 40,000 kilometers. If you take L equal 10, the wavelength will be 4,000 kilometers. L equal 100, 400 kilometers. L equal 1,000, 40 kilometers. If you want to describe something at the surface of the Earth which vary with a 40-kilometer wavelength, you will need to use a spherical harmonics decomposition up to L equal 1000. If you don't do that, you will see only variation on wavelengths which are larger. And once you have described on a sphere your function with all spherical harmonics, you truncate at L equal 10, you remove all signal of small wavelengths, and you get only the signal for large wavelengths. That's a filter. Okay. So it's very good because magnetic field should follow spherical harmonics. So that's the expansion of the. Instead of exponential EM5, we use cosinus and sinus decomposition using a Moivre formula. And these coefficients are called the Gauss coefficient. I wonder why, but okay, this is the way we call it. And G is referring, we don't start with A, we start with G because of the Gauss coefficient. And H, L, and we go. So each coefficient is a kind of a coordinate into the spherical coordinates, spherical harmonics basis. So G, L, M, where L is the order, M, if these coefficients tend to be 0, meaning there is no signal in this function, and if the coefficient becomes very large compared to the other, saying that the magnetic field, the total magnetic field, is close to spherical harmonics. And A is the Earth radius. Okay, that's a strange way of noting the Earth radius, but you see that the order of the magnetic potential vary with L. We will use that. So, since Gauss, we do produce a magnetic field model. Because we do have magnetic measurements in the observatories, but they are local measurements. And we do want to produce maps which, in a way, interpolate measurements between local measurements. We'd like to have the magnetic field everywhere at the surface of the Earth. So we do use the spherical harmonics to do that. And every 5 years, the geomagneticians meet somewhere, keep it secret, because be careful. With some battles, no, that's not true. And they share their data and produce a model which is as close to the magnetic data observed in observatories to produce a model for the whole Earth. This model is called it is called IGRF, International Geomagnetic Reference Field. We are the 12th one. We do it every 5 years. Yes. And then, because the magnetic field is changing in time, we produce a geomagnetic reference model for the next 5 years. But then when the 5 years are finished, we meet again and we transform this one into the definitive forever geomagnetic field. And we produce, so you can have this model. It is used widely because your iPhone needs it. Okay, it is inside your iPhone because it's using a compass. Your iPhone is using a compass, so you need to know the geomagnetic field at any spot. But we do measure it at 400 kilometers above our heads or in 198 93 national observatories. But any place as a place, we do not measure it. Okay. So it makes you. So there is plenty of people from everywhere in the world. So Erwan Thébault is from Nantes. So he is the one who produced the 2015, but also the 2010, I suppose. Uh, so you have this paper. So it's like this, a very interesting paper, you see. So this is the one, IGRF 2015. Before it was a DGRF because this one we are not sure about it. And these are the Gauss coefficient. So okay. So you have the AGRF 1900. So G10, this is L now noted N. Okay. M is noted M. Good. G10 is was in 1900 minus 31. So okay. 543 in nanotesla. This is nanotesla map, and you have everything like this. So now knowing G and H using EGRF, you can compute V. And if you can compute V, you can compute B, and you're safe. So we do it, Céline, do it for us. For L equal 1, M equals 0. So easy. You take all of this. P10 is cosinus theta. Easy. G10, and you apply this. So you find that for 1, 0. And knowing V, you take the gradient of V, and you find BR, B theta, B phi. You play with it, and you find that. Oh, that remembers something. That remembers this. You don't see, you're not excited about that, but that's a that's a big discovery. The L equal 1, M equal 0 of Gauss through all the spherical harmonics, all this mathematics, is exactly what is a dipole, an actual dipole. Exactly the same with this correspondence. M was the magnetization, the magnet, the magnetic dipole. It's connected to this. And actually, if you have a magnet like this at the center of the Earth, this is G10, okay? It's a dipole. But you can have a dipole like this and a dipole like this, where this is Z, X, and Y. So here would be G11 and here H11. So the three first spherical harmonics coefficient corresponds to three dipoles. One which is aligned with axis rotation, one in the meridian, Greenwich meridian, we lose that once again, and H11, 90 degrees away from this one. With these three dipoles, we can describe the actual dipole, because you have three components, you add them, and you have a dipole which is aligned with nobody, either X, Y, and Z. And people, what she says, no, people like me, you see G10, G11, H11, yes. 10 degrees. 10 degrees away from the axis of rotation of the Earth. And if you and G20, G21, H21, G22, H22, L equal 2, they are the quadrupoles. You can show it. And L equal 3 are the octopoles. And more and more and more. So the quadrupoles, there is 5 directions possible for the quadrupoles. I can play with this, it's funny. But okay, these are just descriptions. So we can define what we call a spectra then. The power spectra of the magnetic field is directly telling you if you have a lot of energy of your signal, magnetic signal, at what length scale. So the spectra is dependent of L. So here you have, so it's the sum of the squared of the Gauss coefficient. Okay. Here you plot on the y-axis the energy, and here the L, which is becomes the N now. Okay. And these, yeah, because I made a simplification. There is one international geomagnetic reference model, but with scientists, any group want to produce this model better than the other ones, right? So we have plenty of other magnetic models, but that's why we do have all this group meeting at one place, and they agree on one model, but they continue to use their own model. The one model published is for commercial use and people who don't understand anything about geomagnetic field. But the one who do understand geomagnetic field, they have their own recipe to produce a model saying this magnetic observatory is maintained by French people. We don't know what they do really with their magnetic measurements. We will reduce the importance of this magnetic data. Or you have recipes, okay? And sometimes they even don't want to tell you the recipes, but okay. So all of these are different models. CM4, Chaos4. 4 means the fourth model of CM. Comprehensive model, ça veut dire. It means. Chaos means something, probably. MF7 also, and that's the difference between Chaos and FF7. But you have here the energy towards N, which you could read as a wavelength, as I said. So there is no zero data, but one is the first one. So that's dipolar. So when you see that the magnetic field is mainly dipolar. This is what we saw on the map, right? And then you have a trend like this. When you go to the quadrupole, octopole, and there is less and less magnetic field. So what Van Hubble showed in 1808 was the magnetic field is a dipole. His result was this, and say all the other are zero. That was the first approximation. But so what we see is that around 15, 16, or 18, we don't know, you have a trend which going like this and then going like this. Wow. So this point from a very long time really attracts the attention of geomagneticians. Yes, geomagneticians. Because this is exactly where you have the magnetic field coming from the core and the magnetic field coming from the crust. And if you divide it 40,000 by 20, it gives you 2,000 kilometers. 2,000 kilometers, this is a typical size of a continent. It's 15, so it's, let's say 5,000 kilometers or 8,000 kilometers, typical size of continents or oceans. Typical. This is what is written here. Okay, then what we can do is, this is what we do. I mean, we also know the way it changes with radius. So if you measure the magnetic field very far from the Earth, it will look more dipolar because the dipolar L equal 1, the variation in R is different. If you take L equal 10, this will play a very strange role. So we can, what we call, I don't know in English actually, I even don't know in French anymore. Prolongement vers le bas. Okay, if you go down, uh, you know the way each gauge coefficient will vary, and at the surface of the core, at the CMB, this is very strange. This become flat, and this is not written here. Will become like this. Okay, so when we discovered that, it was used by a few strange people who say that at the surface of a dynamo, the spectrum is flat. So this is still used in planetology because we have the magnetic field of Mercury, or a way to estimate where the magnetic field has been produced is to take the spectra and make it flat. And we found, doing that, we found a radius, and this gives you an idea, because on the Earth core it's like this. This gives you an idea of where is produced the magnetic field. No proof of that. That's just bullshit. But we have no other things, so we do what we can. So at the top of the CMB, you can see that all spherical harmonics the spectrum is flat, so all spherical harmonics is the same weight, except the dipole, which is 10 times larger. So the magnetic field, even at the CMB, is mainly dipolar. And this is the magnetic field at the surface of the core. Nothing to do with what we have seen at the surface of the Earth. There is many small length scale. So this is the same view. There is no continents at the CMB. I remind you, okay? But so you have things like that. You have to remember that doing that. Yeah, that's a very important. Perhaps this is written. No. Céline, what have you done? What we project to the core is only the first 13 or 14 degree, because we have no information. Probably the magnetic field coming from the core continue here, but it is screened by the crystal magnetic field. So in this map we don't see any small scale, because this small scale, if they were present, would have been screened by the crystal field. So this is what we have to explain. And this is what we have to explain by dynamo theory. What did she say? Oh, yes. Very interesting. You see, at the poles, it's mainly dipolar, with the north pole at a given place, south pole. But you see, you have what we call a reverse patch. Exactly at the pole, it's very strange, we have the magnetic field which is in the wrong direction. This is true at the south pole, and this is true at the north pole, even more at the north pole. And probably this is the reason why we have this. Many people have discussed this reverse patch. And if you do the opposite truncation, taking this time only the component larger than 13, you find the magnetic crust map, crustal field, and then you can do tectonics, you can do many different things, because then the magnetic field will be used as as a memory of what happened in the crust and not of what happened in the core. Okay. Temporal variation in 5 minutes. Uh, we do measure the magnetic field from 1840 free components. We do measure magnetic field with magnetic data, with magnetic satellite since 1990, 1999, so almost 20 years. So we can see the way the magnetic field is changing in time. And it is changing in time very fast. Here are the data, declination and inclination data in Paris. You see? The creation of the Observatoire de Paris was 1678, so around here. But we do have measurements before, made by people in universities. First, we do measure the derivation. That's why the declination was estimated around 10 degrees in Paris. But in 1620, what was his name? I forgot. There was a English monk, monk, not monk, professor at the university. Same. If you want to become a professor at the university, it's like a monk life. You know? This monastery is the university, and you have grand mass, which are seminars, and you have to obey also. That's not known. And you have your master. This is your PhD advisor. Okay. And everything like this. But this is true. I mean, in Cambridge and Oxford, and they were mainly religious places, right? Even in Paris was like this. And in 1620, they did measure declination, but by that time, this is when we discover the world using more and more complex compass. So there was people in workshop who were doing better and better compass with better needle, magnetic needles. And we do measure declination of 10 degrees. And it's very funny because when for 100 years we did measure, but was not very clear. So in 1620, I forgot his name. Was it in Cambridge? I suppose it was in Cambridge. Yes, did measure a declination, and he couldn't. This guy find a declination which was different. And he was a good scientist. He said, "I've made the experiment the same way that my PhD advisor has made it 60 years ago." And the first rule for a PhD student is your PhD advisor is always right. Remember that. That's still old today. And then, yeah, there is your work. And if your work is different from your PhD advisor, then you're right. Your PhD advisor is right, so something else has to move. The geomagnetic field. So, Gélibrand, that's his name, Gélibrand, published in 1620 that the Earth's magnetic field is changing in time, at least in Cambridge. So, in France, it was not changing. And in 1620, then it changed. And nobody really know what all the other students, PhD students at that time, when they did measure so probably it was a maximum. Okay, but he did change. So that's why we need magnetic observatories to observe this change. Okay, so it changed very fast, more than 10 degrees by a century. more than 1 degree by 10 years. Okay, so these are the revolutions, and these are the data. Okay, so Jackson et al. Andy Jackson now in ETH. There is people from ETH here. Yes. So Andy is now at ETH. That's his main work. In 2000, he built using data sets from observation, marine observation, because all these boats they use compass, and there was a kind of a scientist at any boats, and they had logs where they do. Sometimes they could see the stars, so they could see. They could determine the geographic north, and they plot what the compass was giving. So Andy and many of his students really study all these logs, took all this data, and rebuilt what was the magnetic field not only in Greenwich or Paris, but any place on the Earth where we could have measurements. So there was difficulties, but so these are the data they found before 1590. There is 160 data, and the cross you can see where the European navigators they were going to Brazil. They were going. These are probably the Portuguese and the Spanish, and there was a route also to the India. Okay, and going in time, the data becomes more and more. But you can see the commercial routes really of that time. This is between 1700 and this is the 18th century. Very nice, huh? And this is the 19th, 20th century, 19th century. So, so missing data in poles, and from that I will show you the movie of the magnetic field. And from that we can deduce the magnetic field everywhere. And this is the last bit. Um, it, it is a magnetic South Pole, which is located at the North Geographic Pole. This is Canada. Perhaps some of you recognize. This is Canada is here actually, and this is northern Canada. The pole is around here, the geographic pole. And this is the location of the magnetic poles. From 1590, the first model of Jackson. So these are models, and these are true measurements. True measurements are, what did she say? Yellow square. So the first true measurements was here. I told you there was an expedition to measure where it was the pole. These guys were not frozen, but the one in Antarctica with the Scott expedition, just all of them died. Okay, was 1910 by memory, but as I didn't prepare anything, I should tell you stories to make time going. 1904. So we're sure it was here because we were measured by human beings who went there, and this curve is given by the reconstruction of geomagnetic field models, and the pole is doing something strange. You see, we have to explain that. It's even crazy. From the 90s, this is where I defend my thesis. You see, it happened something very strange. And right now, if it goes like this forever, no, for 10 years, it will be in Siberia. But nobody knows what will happen now. It could come back this way, you know. I want to tell you that we have no model to predict this. Even this huge increase in velocity is difficult to understand. So now there is physicists, and you can be part of them, going to measure it. Next expedition is 2018. Has been done probably this summer. So last time Miura Mandea, perhaps some of you know her. She's from IPGP and part of CNES. She went. She saw me. She sent me photographs. Now it's a plane, you know. You go with a plane. You land in the ice, and you do measure the magnetic field, drink champagne, and then back. Okay, easy life. So these are the velocities. Velocities in kilometer per year of the poles. And I just want to attract your attention that the South Pole is not doing that at all. So you go by 50 kilometers a year now, and during this story, it's more or less 5. So we have an increase of factor 10 in this velocity, and nobody has predicted it, right? I thought it was the end. It was not. Then I will come back tomorrow because I'm off by 5 minutes. I want just to show you. Oh yeah, there is plenty. I can't believe it. Okay, tomorrow then. Thank you.